And welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're talking about the takeaway. Okay, so the whole point is now that a lot of the content that I've talked about on the channel I think is more important than the takeaway position. But the problem is, I suppose, is that it's still important that you understand what you should be trying to do in the takeaway. And therefore, if you were looking for a golf swing which was more consistent, then therefore the technically more sound the whole thing is, the better chance you've got of repeatability. Hence the reason now for talking about the takeaway. Plus, to be honest with you, quite a few of you guys have been asking questions about what should happen in the backswing position, especially maybe as a trigger going early back, which has also prompted this video. First thing to understand is probably to discuss a little bit of the grip, but then also the posture, okay? One of the reasons why I won't talk about the posture in too much detail is because obviously biomechanically every golfer is slightly different. Okay, so everybody's going to be able to struggle to conform to normality, and therefore you have to operate within what's comfortable for you. So we don't talk too much into detail about that, but one of the suggestions I would make is that you want to, if you were to draw a line vertically through each hip bone, you'd want it to fall on the inside of your ankles. I think that's an important thing because it helps you shift pressure in the backswing. What is more important though is to understand the functionality of the grip. Now again, you don't have to conform to normality and what's known as orthodox, but a couple of suggestions would be, in the left hand you want to grip the club in the fingers first. Okay, allow the heel pad to sit directly on the top. But what's more important about the grip is that you understand that basically in the takeaway position, which we'll talk about more in a moment, but also at the top of the backswing, essentially what's happening is the forearms are rotating. So if you take a grip which is strong, which means your left hand is sitting more dominant on top of the club, basically your left forearm is going more into what's known as a pronation. So you can see my watch is moving more on top of the club. Now this is fine to understand, but you just need to understand now that if you're going to rotate this forearm so much in the setup position, then you won't have to feel like you're rotating it as much going in towards the backswing. And this is just about finding your balance. The point of talking about the grip is basically the one thing that I would probably suggest that you don't go too much down the route of is gripping the club too weak, which means that my left forearm would rotate more underneath the club. So more into what's known as a supination movement, and therefore the right hand would sit too much on top. The reason for this is just that what can start to happen is for you to perceive to have a kind of, should we say, orthodox takeaway, then it's just going to be difficult because you're going to have to start rotating this left forearm quite a lot, and all of a sudden there's a possibility it's going to have a knock-on effect to the club face. So as long as you're operating within sort of, okay parameters, which means it's fine for the left wrist, it's fine for the left hand to be weaker than normal, but we don't want to go too much underneath. In terms of going too strong, I think personally you're okay. I think you've just got to really be concerned in terms of going too much into that weak part of the backswing. Okay, so once we've talked about the grip, then what's important to understand is that depending on how you're holding the club will change the aesthetics between the relationship between the shaft, your arm and the back of your left wrist. So for example, if you're somebody who grips the club much stronger because of the way that you're holding the club, then basically the left wrist will start to become, should we say, looking more kind of cupped, right? So the back of the left wrist will look more in this sort of angle. And again, if you were somebody who is more conventional, you'd still retain an element of that sort of angle, but just not as much. The point is, as soon as you start to take the club back within the first kind of 6 to 12 inches, what should start to happen is that the left wrist should start to flatten. Now, reason for this is because what needs to happen in the backswing is that your right wrist needs to kind of hinge. So it needs to move in this manner because it's going to help you keep the club on plane. So as soon as you start to take the club back, you want to get the feeling, regardless as to how you hold the club, whether you're a strong holder, whether you're more orthodox or slightly weak, then all you're trying to do in that first kind of 6 to 12 inches is get the feeling that you're just encouraging the left wrist to operate more flat. This is important because what we need to happen in the backswing is this right wrist needs to start creating a hinge. And in my personal opinion, it makes more sense to start happening a little bit sooner. Okay, so what I've done now is I've used the target line just to represent as a swing plane line. So if you don't understand what swing plane is, then I've done a video on that, and it might be worthwhile you watching it after this video, just so it brings more sense. Now, the point is that as I go back to the point when what's known as the first kind of takeaway is when the club shaft is horizontally placed, there's a couple of things that would have started to happen, okay? First thing is that my left wrist is now relatively flat. That would be based on my grip, but also based on the fact that my right wrist has started to increase its angle of hinge. What we can also see is my right arm is more bent, obviously, than it was in the setup position. And the whole point of introducing the target line, which is also known as our swing plane line, is that if you were to draw a line through my forearm, it would point down towards the target line itself. And I think that's a good indication, right? Because does the takeaway matter? Not massively. But like I said earlier when I introduced the video, if you can swing something quite conventionally, it gives you a better chance of repeatability. Now, what's also happening in the backswing is that when you start to take the club back, not that you'd be consciously massively aware of this, but my left forearm would start to rotate as much as my right forearm would start to rotate. So basically for my grip, my left forearm is doing what's known as pronation, which you can see now my watch face has moved, and my right forearm is going into what's known as supination, which means it's becoming more kind of upward facing. Now, as a good indication, you can see my right forearm is pointing through the plane line. Now, the thing is, if you started to have a discrepancy where you started to do too much rotation, then obviously the first indication we can normally see is the club head. But a nice feeling is you can also see my right forearm is no longer facing down towards the target line. And I personally think it's a good little kind of indicator in that first move that as you take the club back, you want the forearm pointing down towards your target line as you naturally allow this kind of hinging action on the back of the right wrist. And I think, you know, as long as you can get that position good, then all of a sudden you've got the best sort of foundation to start to build a better backswing position. Continue this on. If you were to video your swing and you get to left arm horizontal, you could also argue this is sometimes used as a reference for a takeaway position. I don't think it really matters in terms of which one you're going to look for. You could look for both, you could look for just one of these positions. It doesn't really matter. But the point is what should start to happen now, by the time I get to left arm horizontal, a couple of things again should have happened. One, my right arm would have bent even more, right? Now, one of the benefits of allowing your right elbow to bend is that it kind of induces a natural wrist cock move, okay? So if I kind of don't allow my arm to bend and I kind of just go for a very wide takeaway, then this is something that we see some professional golfers naturally do, arguably because it feels more powerful. But the reality is that by the time they get to left arm horizontal, the top of the backswing, the arm is going to bend anyway. So on comments that I've had in the past, people have kind of, when I've talked about the right elbow functionality, they've suggested, oh no, you're supposed to keep your right arm straight. I think if you want to go straight in the takeaway, you can if you want to. Some people and coaches advocate that it gives you more power. I don't think that's true. I don't think there's any evidence to that, because inevitably what needs to happen at the top of your backswing is you need to be in a position like so. So the right arm is going to have to function in this way anyway. So therefore, if you do go wider in the takeaway, all you're doing is just delaying the inevitable. So it just doesn't make a massive amount of sense to try and spend most of your time adopting a takeaway like, I don't know, say Cameron Champ, hoping that it's going to revolutionize what you do as a golfer, because it won't. The whole point of this video is that these are some of the things that you have to be looking for. Now, going back to when we're left arm horizontal, what, like I said, would have happened is that my right arm would have bent more. This therefore induces a wrist cocking movement. So again, if I straighten my arm, there's going to be less wrist cock going on. What's also started to happen now is that if you look at the back of my right wrist, obviously it's hinging. And the question is, how much hinge would it actually create? Well, enough to keep the club on plane. Okay, so some golfers will swing maybe their arms more up in front of the body, and therefore they will have less wrist hinge, because obviously you're trying to point the club on plane. Some golfers might go flatter, and therefore you would start to create more hinge. But the point is that's my whole point of this and the whole point of the channel. I'm not advocating that you have to follow a certain methodology. If anything, I'm trying to encourage you not to go down that route, because I think it's detrimental towards your natural game. But there are a set of parameters that you have to operate within, and that's what I'm trying to talk about. So we've mentioned the first kind of position. As we get to left arm horizontal, basically what you're looking for is that, in my opinion, the shaft angle should be pointing somewhere down towards the target line, because that would be an indication that you're on plane. What would happen from that position is that the right arm would naturally bend, because again it encourages an element of wrist cock, and therefore you can see the back of my right wrist has created enough hinge to help me keep the club on plane. The last point is that all you want to try and do is keep your left arm straight. A nice relaxed straight, not trying to force it too much. But obviously what you don't want to do is you don't want to have too much of a bent left arm at this position, because ideally once you get into a textbook sort of position here, and you understand the sort of position where what best suits your game, then as you swing up to the top, all that's going to happen is that you're just going to kind of externally rotate the right shoulder to be able to help you swing the left arm up on plane. So really, if you can do a lot of the good work in the early stages of the backswing, and then as you carry on going up, you're going to be able to create a much more repeatable golf swing. Now, if any of you have watched much of the content on the channel before, if this is your first video, then I would watch some of the other videos if you can, because like I keep saying, the whole point is that I don't agree that you should swing one certain way. Every golfer is different. Biomechanically, we're all different, as I've already mentioned earlier, and therefore you need to understand what is best for you. So whether you grip the club strong, then you just need to understand that as you go back to your positions, the wrist will look slightly different to help you keep the club on plane. The elbow may look slightly different. If you're somebody who grips it more conventionally, then you'll probably notice the way your left wrist is operating flatter at this sort of position. But where I see golfers get wrong is when they've maybe had lessons or they've tried to self-diagnose, and there's somebody who grips the club quite strong and then they're trying to flatten the left wrist. Then all of a sudden you're going to start manipulating the club face unnaturally, and you're going to start to get yourself in a mess. So those are the things you need to do, and those are your checkpoint positions for the kind of optimum sort of positions that you need to have going in towards your backswing. Is it the end of the world? No, because the most important thing about the golf swing is coming down in towards impact. There are examples, obviously Furyk comes to mind, and other golfers who swing flatter and more upright. But what you've also got to understand is that if you watch the detail in this video, they're still operating on plane, right? So like I said, if you choose to go more upright, that doesn't matter. But don't go upright and then try and hinge the back of your right wrist, because then you're not going to be on plane, it's going to be in a mess. You have to understand the concept of keeping the club on plane, and that is generally going to define the position of your wrists. If you're going to go for a more orthodox route with an orthodox grip, then you can start to do some of the other things I've mentioned before. So as ever, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Always appreciate a thumbs up and a like. Remember, what's absolutely free is to send the swings into the channel, right? That's absolutely free to do, and I'll give you a few little tips so at least you know you're working on the right sort of thing. And it gives us an opportunity where we can all learn together. What's also absolutely free is to press that subscribe button. Press the little bell icon as well. It means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out. And I'll catch up with you again soon.